Welcome to another story. This is Moonlit. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Weight of a High-Rise Deposit. The sky over the Joseon wilderness had been the color of a fresh bruise, purple and swollen with thunder. "I told you not to make me do this," Moonbin had whispered, his voice cracking beneath the weight of the spiritual seal. His white robes were splattered with mud and the golden, ethereal blood of a deity. Before him, pinned to the mouth of the ancient stone well by invisible stakes of light, Lee Jae Min had laughed. It was a jagged, horrific sound. The fox spirit's 9 tails lashed behind him like silken banners of war, each one capable of leveling the village in the valley below. "Then don't, shaman," Jae Min had spat, his amber eyes burning with a betrayal so hot it felt like a physical brand on Moonbin's soul. "Step aside. Let me burn it all. They fear me anyway, let me give them a reason." "I loved you," Moonbin whispered, so low the wind nearly stole it. Then, he slammed his palm onto the final talisman. The scream that followed haunted Moonbin for the next 3 centuries. It was the sound of a god being stuffed into a bottle, the sound of damp stone and absolute silence. Incheon, South Korea. Present day. "The last thing I gave him was a curse, the first thing he gave me was a security deposit." Moonbin leaned against the doorframe of his modest 2-bedroom apartment, staring at the man standing in the hallway. The modern world was loud, smelling of diesel, exhaust and fried chicken, but the man standing there smelled of ancient cedarwood and ozone. He was wearing a black oversized hoodie and ripped jeans, a guitar case slung over one shoulder and a battered suitcase in his hand. His hair was dyed a soft, silvery gray, falling over eyes that were no longer burning amber, but a guarded, dark honey. "I'm here about the room," the man said. His voice was lower than Moonbin remembered, smoother, sanded down by time. The ad said, "No pets, no smoking, quiet professionals only." Moonbin didn't breathe. His heart, which had beaten with the slow, rhythmic pulse of an immortal for 300 years, suddenly stuttered. Jae Min. He looked exactly the same, yet fundamentally broken. The predatory grace was gone, replaced by a weary slouch. But the soul was unmistakable. It was the same wildfire he'd quenched in the dark of that well. "Name?" Moonbin asked, his voice miraculously steady. He decided, in a split second of cowardice, to play the stranger. "Lee Jae Min," the fox replied. He didn't even flinch at the name. He looked Moonbin dead in the eye, and for a terrifying second, Moonbin thought he'd been made. But Jae Min's gaze remained flat. To the fox, Moonbin was just another human landlord in a city of millions. Or perhaps, the trauma of the seal had blurred the shaman's face into a smudge of moonlight. "The deposit is 2 months up front," Moonbin said, stepping back to let him in. "Kitchen is shared. Don't touch my tea herbs." Jae Min stepped over the threshold, and the air in the apartment instantly pressurized. The wards Moonbin had spent decades perfecting began to hum, sensing a great calamity entering the living room. Jae Min stopped in the center of the rug, his nostrils flaring. He dropped his suitcase. Slowly, he turned his head, his gaze raking over the minimalist furniture until it landed on a small, jade statuette on the bookshelf, a relic from the Joseon era. "You," Jae Min rasped. The human mask peeled away in an instant. His shadow on the wall suddenly elongated, sprouting ghostly, flickering appendages. "I know that scent. I'd know that stagnant, holy stench anywhere." "Jae Min, don't. You trapped me in the dark." Jae Min roared. The windows rattled in their frames. A vase on the coffee table shattered without being touched. 300 years. "Do you know how many times I counted the stones in that well? Do you know how cold it was?" He lunged. It wasn't a human movement, it was a blur of predatory intent. He intended to tear Moonbin's throat out right there on the hardwood floor. Thwack. Jae Min hit an invisible wall 6 inches from Moonbin's face. Golden sparks showered down like dying stars. Moonbin hadn't moved a muscle, but his fingers were curled into a specific mudra behind his back. This is a high rise, Jae Min, Moonbin said, his voice dropping into the cold, authoritative tone of the high exorcist. If you level this building, the shockwave will kill 300 people and alert every hunter in the province. Is that what you want? To be hunted again before you've even unpacked? Jae Min pressed his face against the shimmering barrier, his teeth bared in a snarl. I'll kill you. I'll burn this city just to watch you choke on the ash. You can try, Moonbin said, though his heart was breaking all over again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a spare key, tossing it through the barrier. It hit Jae Min's chest and fell to the floor. But for now, your room is the one on the left. Towels are in the linen closet. Try not to shed. Jae Min stared at the key, then at the man who had ruined his life. The golden barrier flickered and died. The fox spirit stood there, trembling with a rage that had no outlet, looking smaller than he ever had in the mountains. Without another word, Jae Min snatched the key, grabbed his suitcase, and slammed the bedroom door so hard the walls groaned. Moonbin stood alone in the kitchen, his hand finally shaking. He looked at the shattered vase. Welcome home, he whispered to the empty room. Chapter 2, of Cold Wells and Cramped Kitchens. The sun rose over Incheon not with a poetic flare, but with the gray, insistent hum of a city that never truly slept. Inside the apartment, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Moonbin hadn't slept, an immortal didn't strictly need it, but usually, he enjoyed the reset. Last night, however, he had spent the hours sitting cross-legged on the sofa, listening to the muffled thuds and restless pacing coming from the guest room. He knew that pace. It was the rhythm of a caged animal measuring the dimensions of its bars. At 7 a.m., Moonbin moved to the kitchen. He began the ritual that had grounded him for the last century, brewing barley tea. The clink of the ceramic lid felt like a gunshot in the quiet. A door creaked open. Jae Min emerged, looking less like a vengeful deity and more like a disgruntled college student. His silver hair was a bird's nest of sleep-deprived spikes, and he was wearing an oversized t-shirt that hung off his sharp collarbones. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen tiles, eyeing Moonbin as if checking for a hidden dagger. The bathroom is free, Moonbin said, not looking up from his tea. I don't need a bath, Jae Min snapped, his voice gravelly. I spent 300 years in a damp hole. I'm clean enough for a lifetime. Moonbin finally looked up. He saw the way Jae Min's eyes darted to the windows, then to the corners of the ceiling where the protective wards hummed invisibly. The fox looked twitchy, starved for space but terrified of the open sky. The well was an extremity, Moonbin said softly, pushing a steaming mug across the counter. I did what I had to do to save the valley, Jae Min. You were out of control. Save the valley, Jae Min mocked, stepping closer to the counter. He didn't take the tea. Instead, he gripped the edge of the granite until his knuckles turned white. You saved a handful of mortals who died of old age 50 years later anyway. And for that, you gave me to the dark. To the rot. You knew I hated the cold, Moonbin. You knew. Moonbin flinched. He did know. He remembered a night on a high ridge, before the madness took hold, where Jae Min had curled his tails around Moonbin's shivering frame just to keep the mountain chill at bay. I heard the seal broke during the Great Hurricane of '59, Moonbin said, pivoting to the present. I was in Europe then. I didn't think. I didn't know you were out. Jae Min let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Out. I crawled out of the mud while the sky was screaming. I spent 40 years hiding in the forests of Gangwon, eating squirrels and freezing because I was too afraid to use my fire. I thought if I flickered, you'd appear out of the shadows to bury me again. He finally reached for the mug, but his hand trembled. He took a sip, then pulled a face. This tastes like dirt. It's barley. It's good for your nerves. My nerves are fine. My patience is what's thinning. Jae Min set the mug down with a definitive thud. Why are you here? Why Incheon? Why this pathetic little box of a home? I wanted to be human for a while, Moonbin admitted. I'm tired, Jae Min moving every 10 years, changing names, watching the world turn into steel and glass. I just wanted a roommate and a quiet life. A roommate, Jae Min repeated, his eyes narrowing. You posted that ad knowing I'd find it. You're pulling my strings again. Moonbin shook his head. I didn't know it was you until you stood at the door. But the universe has a cruel sense of humor regarding fated encounters. Since you're here, we need rules. He pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer. It was a standard lease agreement, but with handwritten additions in the margins. 1. No spiritual manifestations in common areas. 2. No luring humans home for consumption or mischief. 3. The fridge is split 50/50ths. Label your kimchi. 4. No fire starting inside the unit. Jae Min stared at the list, his lip curling. You're serious? You want a nine-tailed fox to label his side dishes? I want to pass the building inspection next month, Moonbin countered. And I want you to stop looking at me like you're going to bite my ear off. You're weak, Jae Min. I can feel it. Your aura is flickering. The fox went still. For a second, his human glamour wavered, and Moonbin saw a flash of something silver and jagged behind him, not a tail, but the ghost of one. I'm fine, Jae Min hissed, snatching the pen from the counter. He scribbled his name at the bottom in a jagged, aggressive hand. I'll stay. I'll pay your ridiculous rent. But don't think for a second that this makes us even. He turned to stomp back to his room, but paused at the door. And Moonbin? If you ever try to put a talisman on me while I'm sleeping, I'll ensure we both burn down with this pathetic little box. As the bedroom door slammed, Moonbin picked up the tea Jae Min had rejected. It was still warm. He realized, with a heavy knot in his chest, that while Jae Min had been trapped in the dark for centuries, he had been trapped in the light, equally lonely, equally stuck in a past that refused to stay buried. Chapter 3, The Glitch in the Veil. Incheon was crying. A relentless, gray drizzle smeared the neon signs of the Namdong district, turning the pavement into a mirror of oil and rain. For Moonbin, the weather was a nuisance, for Jae Min, it was a trigger. Every drop that hit the windowpane seemed to echo the rhythmic drip-tap of the limestone walls in the well. Stop pacing, Moonbin said, not looking up from his laptop. He was pretending to file digital taxes, a mundanity that usually soothed him. You're going to wear a trench into the floorboards. It's too quiet, Jae Min snapped. He was standing by the balcony glass, his forehead pressed against the pane. The air in this city is thick. It feels like breathing wool. It's called smog. Welcome to the 21st century. It's called suffocation, Jae Min retorted. Suddenly, he stiffened. His ears, the human ones, tilted toward the window. Do you hear that? Moonbin closed his laptop. He felt it a second later, a jagged rip in the local ley lines. It was nearby, raw and hungry. A low-level Guishan, a hungry ghost, had likely been stirred up by the construction crew digging a new foundation 3 blocks over. Stay here, Moonbin commanded, reaching for his coat. Don't tell me what to do, shaman, Jae Min hissed. He was already at the door, his eyes flashing a dangerous, molten gold. Before Moonbin could grab his ritual bells, the fox was out the door. The construction site was a pit of mud and twisted rebar. A massive crane loomed over the scene like a skeletal bird. In the center of the muddy bowl, a terrified night watchman was backed against a concrete pillar, staring at a mass of swirling black smoke that shrieked with a dozen discordant voices. Moonbin arrived just as the shadow mass lunged. He reached into his sleeve for a purification slip, but a blur of silver moved faster. Jae Min leapt from the edge of the pit, his body uncoiling with a grace that defied physics. He landed between the watchman and the spirit, his hand outstretched. Blue foxfire sparked at his fingertips, a brilliant, haunting light that cut through the Incheon fog. "Get out," Jae Min growled at the spirit. His voice carried the resonance of a landslide. The spirit hissed, sensing the fox's power was frayed. It surged forward. Jae Min snarled and threw a punch that should have sent a shockwave through the district. Fire erupted, incinerating the front of the shadow mass, but then, flicker. Jae Min's silhouette staggered. The human illusion he wore like a second skin began to tear. Moon Bin, watching from the ridge, froze. As the fox's power surged to meet the threat, his true form bled through the veil. The silver fur, the pointed ears, and the tails, the magnificent, sweeping tails of a high deity. Moon Bin started to count. 1, 2, 5, 7. He stopped. He blinked, rubbing his eyes against the rain, sure he had miscounted in the chaos. But as Jae Min struck again, driving the hungry ghost back into the earth with a burst of desperate spiritual pressure, the count remained the same. 7. The 8th and 9th tails were missing. In their place were 2 jagged, blackened stumps of energy that looked like charred wood. They didn't flow, they bled a faint, sickly purple mist. The spirit dissipated into the wet air, defeated. The watchman fainted. Jae Min stood in the mud, chest heaving, his form trembling as the 7 tails dissolved back into the illusion of his jeans and hoodie. Jae Min. Moon Bin scrambled down the embankment, slipping in the mud. The fox didn't turn. He looked down at his shaking hands. I had it, he whispered. Then, his knees buckled. Moon Bin caught him before he hit the muck. The heat coming off Jae Min's body was terrifying. It wasn't the warm glow of a fox spirit's internal furnace, it was a dry, consuming fever. Jae Min's skin was pale, almost translucent, and his breath came in ragged, wet gasps. Your tails, Moon Bin whispered. Jae Min, what happened to your tails? I sealed a 9-tail. Where are the others? Jae Min's eyes drifted open, unfocused and glazed with pain. He looked at Moon Bin, and for the first time in 300 years, the hatred in his gaze was replaced by a hollow, haunting fear. They took them, Jae Min wheezed, his hand feebly clutching Moon Bin's forearm. She burned them. It won't stop burning, Bin Ah. The use of the old, intimate suffix hit Moon Bin harder than the fox's physical blow ever could. Jae Min's eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness, his body turning unnaturally cold despite the fever raging within. Moon Bin gathered the broken deity into his arms. The weight was wrong, too light, as if Jae Min's very soul was evaporating. Who? Moon Bin growled into the rain, his own immortal aura flaring in a terrifying, golden halo. Who touched you? There was no answer but the sound of the Incheon traffic and the dying hiss of the rain. Chapter 4, The Scent of Burning Fur. The apartment smelled of antiseptic and scorched ozone. Moon Bin had cleared the coffee table, replaced it with a traditional futon, and laid Jae Min there, surrounded by a circle of protective salt and jade basins filled with cool water. Jae Min was thrashing. His human glamour was completely gone now, his silver hair had lengthened, sprawling across the pillow like spilled silk, and his fox ears flicked spasmodically against his skull. But it was the tails that broke Moon Bin's heart. The 7 remaining plumes of silver fur were matted and dull, twitching in a frantic, uncoordinated rhythm. Where the 8th and 9th should have been, the air shimmered with a sickly, charred heat, a phantom pain that radiated from his very soul. Don't, please. Jae Min gasped, his eyes squeezed shut. It's too hot. The fire, it's white. Stop it. Moon Bin wrung out a cloth in cold water and pressed it to Jae Min's forehead. The spirit hissed, his body arching off the futon. I'm here, Moon Bin whispered, his voice thick with a guilt he hadn't known he could still feel. Jae Min, look at me. You're in Incheon. The well is gone. The fire is gone. It took another hour before the fever broke into a cold, shivering sweat. Jae Min's eyes snapped open, not with the predatory sharpness of a fox, but with the hollowed-out stare of a survivor. He looked at Moon Bin's hand, which was still resting on his brow, and didn't pull away. He didn't have the strength. "You saw," Jae Min whispered, his voice a ghost of itself. "I saw," Moon Bin replied. He sat back on his heels, his expression grim. "I sealed a great nine-tailed deity. You were the terror of the northern provinces. To see you like this, it shouldn't be possible. Even a seal shouldn't have withered your divinity this much." Jae Min let out a wet, rattling breath. He sat up slowly, leaning his back against the sofa. His 7 tails curled around his waist like a protective cage. "The seal didn't do this," Jae Min said, staring at the empty space where his power used to reside. 100 years ago, after the storm broke the stones, I was confused. The world had changed. I was starving, my essence drained from the centuries of darkness. I crawled toward a village, looking for a stray hen, anything to stop the hollow ache in my chest." He closed his eyes, his hands trembling. "She was waiting. An exorcist. Not like you, Bina. You were righteous. Boring. Blindly devoted to the greater good. But this woman. Young Minji. She didn't care about balance. She wanted a trophy." Moon Bin's jaw tightened. "An exorcist found you in your weakened state. She trapped me in a net of holy copper," Jae Min rasped. The memory seemed to turn his eyes into glass. "I couldn't shift. I was stuck in my beast form. She laughed while she did it. She said a fox with 9 tails was too dangerous to be left alive, but too beautiful to simply kill. So, she took her ritual blade, the one dipped in celestial sulfur, and she began to saw." Moonbin felt a surge of cold, murderous fury rise in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in centuries. "She cut the 8th first," Jae Min continued, his voice dropping to a flat, dead monotone. "Then the 9th. And then, she didn't just take them. She cast a circle of holy fire right there in the dirt. She burned them in front of me. I felt my own soul turning to ash. Every inch of my immortality, my ability to heal, my connection to the heavens, it went up in that white smoke. That's why you can't shift anymore," Moonbin realized, his voice trembling. "That's why you're getting sick. Your life force is leaking out of the wounds that never closed." Jae Min looked up, a single tear of molten gold tracking down his cheek. "I'm a dying god, Moonbin. A 7-tailed freak. I came here because I thought, if I was going to fade away, I wanted to do it in front of the man who started it. I wanted you to see what your justice led to." Moonbin reached out, his fingers hovering near the charred space where the tails had been. He felt the jagged edges of the spiritual mutilation. "Young Minji." The name tasted like poison. "I didn't want this for you," Moonbin said, his voice breaking. "I wanted you contained, not broken. Does it matter?" Jae Min slumped back, his energy spent. "The result is the same. I'm exhausted, Bina. I'm so tired of being hunted." Moonbin didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Jae Min's. He began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through the floorboards. Slowly, he began to funnel his own immortal vitality, the very curse that kept him from aging, into the fox. Jae Min gasped, his eyes widening as the golden warmth flooded his cold veins. "What are you doing? You'll shorten your own." "I have too much time anyway," Moonbin whispered. "Sleep, Jae Min. I'll be here when you wake. And I promise you, no one will ever take another inch of you again." As Jae Min drifted into a restorative sleep, Moonbin's eyes turned a terrifying, flat white. He had spent 3 centuries trying to be a peaceful observer. But for young Minji, he would remember exactly why he had been the most feared exorcist in history. Chapter 5, Shadow of the Shaman. The rain had stopped, leaving Incheon draped in a thick, suffocating fog that tasted of salt and wet asphalt. Moonbin had spent the morning painting new protection seals on the inside of the front door, his fingers moving with a frantic precision he hadn't used since the Joseon era. Jae Min was awake, but he was a shadow of his former self, sallow-skinned and draped in a heavy wool blanket despite the apartment's heating. He sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a bowl of porridge Moonbin had forced upon him. "I need to go out," Jae Min murmured, his voice thin. "I can't breathe in here. The walls feel like they're closing in again." Moonbin paused, his brush dripping with cinnabar ink. He looked at the fox spirit, the once mighty deity now reduced to a shivering man in a hoodie. "It's not safe, Jae Min. Your aura is still bleeding. You're like a lighthouse for anything that hunts." "I'd rather be hunted in the street than rot in a box," Jae Min snapped, a flicker of his old fire returning to his eyes. "I am not your prisoner. Not anymore." Moonbin sighed, the weight of 3 centuries sagging his shoulders. "Fine. But I'm coming with you." They walked through the crowded markets of Bupyeong, a strange pair, one man radiating a calm, timeless stillness, the other hooded and hunched, flinching at every loud honk of a delivery scooter. Jae Min stopped at a street stall selling hotteok. The smell of cinnamon and brown sugar seemed to ground him. For a moment, watching the steam rise into the cold air, he looked almost human. He reached into his pocket for a few crumpled bills, but his hand froze mid-air. The air around them suddenly turned frigid. The bustling sounds of the market, the shouting vendors, the clatter of pans, began to muffle, as if they were being submerged in deep water. "Bina," Jae Min whispered, his breath hitching. "Something is wrong." From the shadow of a narrow alleyway, an old woman stepped out. She was draped in expensive, heavy silks that looked out of place in the gritty market, and her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch the translucent skin of her face. She leaned on a cane topped with a silver fox skull, but her eyes, sharp, predatory, and clouded with cataracts, were fixed directly on Jae Min. "I knew I smelled something burning," the woman croaked. Her voice sounded like dry leaves skittering over a grave. The little runt survived after all. Jae Min stumbled back, his heel catching on the uneven pavement. His pupils blown wide with terror. "You. Young Minji," Moonbin said, stepping in front of Jae Min. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't need to be told, he could feel the blackened, oily residue of the fox's stolen power clinging to her like a shroud. She had used Jae Min's tales to fuel her own longevity, rotting her soul in the process. "Move aside, boy," Minji hissed, not recognizing Moonbin. To her, he was just a modern shaman, a mere amateur. "That beast is a danger to this city. I'm doing the heavens a favor by finishing what I started." With a speed that defied her age, she reached into her sleeve and flicked a black paper talisman toward Jae Min's face. It was a branding seal, designed to burn the remaining life force out of a spirit's vessel. Moonbin didn't even draw a weapon. He simply reached out and caught the paper between 2 fingers. The talisman hissed, black smoke curling around Moonbin's hand, but it didn't burn him. Instead, the paper began to turn white, the dark ink dissolving under the sheer pressure of Moonbin's ancient, pure divinity. He crushed the paper into dust and let it scatter in the wind. "Finish what you started?" Moonbin asked, his eyes beginning to glow with a terrifying, pale light. "You are a thief and a butcher, young Minji. You took what didn't belong to you and called it righteousness. How dare you?" Minji shrieked. She slammed her cane onto the ground. "If you want to die with the beast, so be it." She bit her thumb and smeared blood across the silver fox skull on her cane. "By the gates of the sunless path, I cast you out. Void domain." The world didn't just go dark, it ceased to exist. The market, the sky, and the street disappeared in a heartbeat, replaced by a vast, featureless gray expanse. There was no wind, no sound, and no horizon. Jae Min let out a strangled cry and fell to his knees. To him, the void wasn't just a spell, it was the well. It was the 300 years of silence and damp stone all over again. He began to claw at his own chest, his 7 tails erupting in a chaotic, flickering mess behind him. No, Jae Min sobbed, his eyes losing focus. Not again. Please, not the dark again. Jae Min, look at me. Moonbin shouted, grabbing the fox by the shoulders. But Minji's laughter echoed from everywhere and nowhere. He has no strength left to break this, shaman. He is a broken thing. And soon, you will both be nothing but echoes in the silence. Moonbin looked at Jae Min's trembling form and felt a white-hot spark of protective rage snap inside him. He had spent centuries regretting the wall he built between them. He wasn't going to let another one stand. Chapter 6, Into the Void. The void was not a place, it was the absence of it. In this gray purgatory, gravity felt like a suggestion and time felt like a stagnant pool. For Moonbin, it was an annoyance, a spiritual trap he had dismantled a dozen times in his long life. But for Jae Min, it was a tomb. The fox spirit was curled into a ball on the invisible floor, his hands pressed so hard against his ears that his knuckles were white. His 7 tails were lashing out blindly, hitting the gray mist and retreating as if burned. He was hyperventilating, the sound of his ragged breath the only thing breaking the oppressive silence. Jae Min, breathe, Moonbin commanded, kneeling beside him. He reached out, but the moment his hand touched Jae Min's shoulder, the fox flinched violently. Don't touch me. Jae Min shrieked, his eyes wide and vacant. It's the well. It's the stone. The water is rising, Bina, it's rising and I can't. I can't see the sky. He was back in the Joseon Mountains, trapped in the dark of Moonbin's making. The trauma of the centuries-long banishment had fused with the terror of Minji's void, creating a psychological feedback loop that was eating him alive. Look at me, Moonbin said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant frequency, the same tone he used to calm the spirits of the restless dead. He didn't grab him this time. Instead, he reached out and took Jae Min's hand, forcing his fingers to interlock with the fox's cold, trembling ones. I am the one who put you in the dark, Moonbin whispered, his eyes locking onto Jae Min's honey-colored ones. And I am the only one who can lead you out. Focus on my hand. Focus on the heat. Moonbin didn't just hold him, he opened the floodgates. He took the immortal curse that had kept him alive for 300 years, the heavy, golden core of his own life force, and pushed it into Jae Min. The void trembled. You're giving me your years, Jae Min gasped, his vision finally clearing. He felt the warmth spreading from his palm up his arm, settling in his chest. It felt like the sun. Not the scorching white fire of Minji, but a soft, autumnal heat. I have too many of them, Moonbin said with a faint, sad smile. And you don't have enough. Take it. Use me as your anchor. With Moonbin's power acting as a bridge, Jae Min's aura stabilized. The flickering glitch in his form smoothed out. He stood up, still leaning heavily on the exorcist, and looked into the gray expanse. Minji's voice cackled from the mist. How touching. A martyr and a monster. But you forget, great shaman, this void is built on his despair. As long as he fears the dark, you are both my prisoners. Moonbin looked at Jae Min, do you still fear the dark? Jae Min looked at their joined hands. The golden light of Moonbin's energy was illuminating the mist, pushing back the gray until they stood in a small circle of brilliant radiance. Not if you're in it with me, Jae Min whispered. He didn't need 9 tails to break a mortal spell. He drew in a breath, and for the first time in a century, he didn't feel the leak in his soul. He channeled Moonbin's golden light into his own blue fox fire. The result was a blinding, teal explosion of celestial energy. Break! Jae Min roared. The void shattered like a mirror hit by a sledgehammer. One moment they were in the grey silence, the next, the cacophony of the Bupyeong market slammed back into their ears. The smell of fried dough, the honking of horns, the chatter of people who hadn't even noticed they were gone. Young Minji stumbled back, her silver-skulled cane snapping in two. She coughed, a spray of black, viscous blood hitting the pavement. Her youth, the stolen glamour she had maintained, was sloughing off her like wet paper. She looked 100 years older in a single second, her skin sagging into deep, grey folds. How, she wheezed, clutching at her throat. He was broken. I cut him. I burned him. You forgot one thing, Moonbin said, stepping forward. His shadow stretched long and terrifying across the market floor, the shadow of a high exorcist who had once commanded the spirits of kings. A fox spirit's power doesn't just come from his tails. It comes from his heart. And you couldn't touch that. Jae Min collapsed then, the adrenaline leaving him in a sickening rush. His tails vanished, and his skin turned a frightening shade of grey. Moonbin caught him, sweeping him up into his arms. He didn't even look at Minji as she crawled in the dirt. He had a different fate in mind for her, one that didn't involve a quick death. We're going home, Moonbin whispered into Jae Min's hair. As he carried the unconscious fox through the crowd, Moonbin's eyes were cold. He had spent 3 centuries being a protector. Now, he was going to be a hunter. Chapter 7, The Reckoning at the Well. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow, rhythmic breathing of the man on the futon. Moonbin stood over Jae Min, watching the way his eyelashes fluttered in a fitful sleep. He had tucked the fox in with a heavy duvet, pinning the corners down with 4 small jade tigers, wards meant to anchor a wandering soul. Stay, Moonbin whispered, brushing a stray silver lock from Jae Min's forehead. I'll be back before the soup gets cold. He stepped out into the night. He didn't take the subway. He didn't call a taxi. He walked through the veil of the physical world, stepping through the folds of space until the salty air of Incheon was replaced by the damp, pine-heavy scent of the northern mountains. He stood at the edge of the ancient well. The hurricane of '59 had cracked the stone, and weeds now choked the mouth where Jae Min had been buried for 300 years. Young Minji was already there. She had crawled back to the site of her greatest triumph, desperate to find the fragments of the power she had lost in the market. She was a pathetic sight, shriveled, her expensive silks tattered and caked in mountain mud. She was scratching at the earth with her fingernails, whispering to the stones. It's here, the resonance. I can feel it, she muttered, her voice a dry rattle. It's not here, Minji, Moonbin said, emerging from the shadows of the pines. She shrieked, spinning around on her knees. You! Give it back. That power was mine. I took it. I earned it by cleansing the world of that filth. You didn't cleanse anything, Moonbin said. He walked toward her, his footsteps making no sound on the fallen needles. You mutilated a deity to feed your own fear of death. You turned an act of balance into an act of butchery. I am an exorcist, she screamed, her eyes bulging. I do what you were too weak to do. I broke him. No, Moonbin said softly, stopping just a few feet away. I broke him. You just tried to steal the pieces. He raised his hand. The air around the well began to vibrate with a low, mournful hum. You like the dark, don't you? You like the feeling of something trapped, something helpless. You've lived off the resentment of this place for decades. Moonbin reached into the air and seemed to grab a handful of the very moonlight. He slammed his fist into the ground, and the ancient seals he had placed 300 years ago, the ones that had been shattered by the storm, suddenly flared back to life. But they weren't white and gold this time. They were a deep, bruised violet. I didn't just seal a fox here, Minji, Moonbin said, his voice echoing like thunder. I sealed the darkness that existed before him. A resting demon that feeds on the psyche of the wicked. It's been very hungry since the fox left. The ground groaned. A fissure opened beneath Minji's feet and a thick, oily black mist began to coil around her ankles like vipers. No. Wait, she cried, her voice cracking. You wanted his tails. Moonbin's eyes were pits of endless starlight. Now you can stay here and count his sorrows until your mind rots away. This isn't a death, Minji. It's a mirror. The mist rose, swallowing her whole. She didn't disappear, she simply froze in place, her eyes wide and glassy. To any hiker passing by, she would look like a weathered statue. But inside her mind, the demon was already playing back every moment of pain she had ever caused, looping them into an eternal, suffocating nightmare. Moonbin turned away. He didn't feel triumph, only a hollow sort of relief. When he returned to the apartment, the sun was beginning to peek over the Incheon skyline. He stopped at a 24-hour grocer and bought fresh ginger, scallions, and a container of high-grade beef bone broth. He entered the quiet living room and found Jae Min sitting up. The fox looked better, the golden energy Moonbin had shared was still circulating in his veins, giving his skin a healthy glow. He was staring at the jade tigers on the floor. You went back, Jae Min said. It wasn't a question. He could smell the pine and the old, stagnant magic on Moonbin's coat. I had to settle a debt, Moonbin said, setting the groceries on the counter. Jae Min stood up, his legs a bit wobbly, and walked into the kitchen. He leaned against the refrigerator, watching Moonbin start the stove. Is she dead? Worse, Moonbin replied, not looking up. She's exactly where I put you. But she won't have the dignity of silence. She'll have her own conscience for company. Jae Min was silent for a long time. Then, he stepped closer, his shoulder brushing against Moonbin's. He reached out and picked up a scallion, turning it over in his long, elegant fingers. You're a terrifying man, Moonbin, Jae Min whispered. I know. And you're a terrible roommate. You're bossy, you're judgmental, and you're far too clean. Moonbin finally looked at him, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And you're a menace who sheds on the sofa. Jae Min didn't snarl this time. He just leaned his head against Moonbin's shoulder, a tired, heavy sigh escaping his lips. Feed me, shaman. I think I'm ready to try being human for a little while longer. Chapter 8, The Eighth Tale is Love. The seasons in Incheon changed with a subtle, metallic sharpness. The humid weight of summer had evaporated, replaced by a crisp autumn wind that rattled the balcony glass and carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from the street below. Inside the apartment, the quiet professional life Moonbin had envisioned had been replaced by something much more complicated and infinitely louder. If you put that much chili oil in the soup, you won't be able to taste the broth I spent 6 hours simmering, Moonbin said, not looking up from his book. He was draped in a thick cardigan, sitting on the sofa that was now permanently decorated with a fine layer of silver-gray hair. The broth is a suggestion, Bin-ah. The spice is a lifestyle, Jae Min retorted. He was standing at the stove, a ladle in one hand and a jar of lao gan ma in the other. He looked healthier now, the hollows of his cheeks had filled out, and his amber eyes had regained a playful, predatory spark. The 7 tails were tucked away beneath his oversized hoodie, but Moonbin could feel them. They weren't lashing in pain anymore, they were humming. Jae Min brought 2 bowls to the coffee table and sat cross-legged on the floor, ignoring the sofa entirely. He preferred the ground, he said it reminded him that the earth wasn't trying to swallow him anymore. I saw the landlord today, Jae Min said between mouthfuls of spicy noodles. He asked why the electricity bill has tripled since I moved in. I told him we're running a server farm, Moonbin lied smoothly. I didn't think he'd believe me if I said my roommate is a celestial battery that accidentally charges the appliances when he's happy. Jae Min paused, his chopsticks halfway to his mouth. Happy? Who said I was happy? I'm still planning my revenge for that no fire in the house rule. You're pouting, Moonbin observed, finally setting his book aside. And your left ear is twitching. You only do that when you're feeling domestic. Jae Min scowled, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he reached out and nudged Moon Bin's knee. 300 years, Moon Bin. I spent 300 years dreaming of how I'd tear your heart out. I had a whole list of insults prepared. I practiced them in the dark. And then you bought me tekbaki, Jae Min sighed, leaning back against the base of the sofa. It's hard to stay vengeful when you're being fed premium beef and high-quality tea. You're a very manipulative man. Moon Bin slid off the sofa to join him on the floor. The transition from high exorcist to man sitting on a rug was one he had made slowly, but surely. He looked at Jae Min, really looked at him. The scars from Minji were still there, invisible to the human eye but present in the way Jae Min's spiritual form sat slightly lopsided. The 8th and 9th tails were gone forever, a permanent reminder of a brutal century. But as Moon Bin watched, the 7 remaining tails flickered into the physical world, soft and luminous. One of them snaked out and curled tentatively around Moon Bin's waist. It was warm, soft, and smelled of cedarwood. I can't give you back what she took, Moon Bin said, his voice dropping to a low, aching sincerity. And I can't take back the 3 centuries I stole. But I can give you the next 300. Jae Min went still. The playful banter died away, replaced by a heavy, faded silence. He turned his head, his face just inches from Moon Bin's. You're an immortal, Jae Min whispered. You're cursed to watch everything wither. Why would you want to watch a broken fox fade away? Because you're not fading, Moon Bin said, reaching out to cup Jae Min's cheek. His thumb traced the line of the fox's jaw. You're the only thing in this world that's as old and as stubborn as I am. You aren't my prisoner, Jae Min. And you aren't my burden. Jae Min's eyes searched Moon Bin's, looking for the lie, the trap, the seal. He found none. He found only the weary, steady devotion of a man who had finally stopped running from his own heart. The 8th tail, Jae Min murmured, closing his eyes as he leaned into Moon Bin's palm. In the old legends, they say the 8th tail represents wisdom. But I think mine was different. Oh. I think my 8th tail was the debt I owed you, Jae Min said. He moved forward, closing the distance until their foreheads rested against each other. And the 9th was the love I was too proud to admit I felt before the well. Moon Bin didn't wait for him to finish. He leaned in and kissed him, a soft, tentative press of lips that tasted of salt, spice, and 3 centuries of unspoken apologies. Jae Min let out a low, vibrating purr deep in his chest. His 7 tails flared, filling the small Incheon apartment with a brilliant, teal light that outshone the city's neon. They weren't perfect. One was a butcher of gods who had learned to be a healer, the other was a vengeful deity who had learned to be a man. They were 2 broken pieces of a Joseon tragedy, finally fitting together in a world of high-rises and high-speed internet. Outside, the city of Incheon roared on, indifferent to the 2 ancient beings sharing a bowl of soup in a cramped apartment. But inside, the shadows were gone. Moon Bin. Jae Min whispered against his lips. Yes. The dishes are your turn. Moon Bin laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed off the wards. Welcome home, Jae Min. Thank you for listening under the same moon. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome here. Good night.